I think the gut was really considered sort of in the backwaters of science. As my colleague in Australia said, I never thought I'd see the day when the colon went mainstream. And it's really true.
What if I told you that gut health isn't just about digestion or bloating? Some scientists say your gut is like a second brain. It plays a role in your mood, your hormone levels, and your risk for disease. First up, Dr. Meyer. He's not just a gastroenterologist. He's also a neuroscientist and the executive director of UCLA's G. Oppenheimer Center for Neurobiology of Stress and Resilience. Dr. Meyer's work has literally shaped how we understand the brain-gut connection. And then we've got Dr. Holly Ingram, a professor at UCSF and one of the leading voices in women's health research. Her lab's uncovering how female physiology is actually different from men's, especially when it comes to gut health and why GI symptoms hit women harder. We'll start with you, Dr. Meyer. You're a gastroenterologist, a documentarian, a researcher, and a professor of medicine. The through line in all your work, of course, is this gut-brain axis. So can you tell us what the gut-brain axis is?
The reason that I went to medical school is the brain-body interaction. That was the only reason I chose medicine. And I pursued this initially, brain-gut. This was the most obvious organ, particularly because there's a clinical entity called irritable bowel syndrome that is common in a medical setting. So basically that term refers to the fact that the brain and the gut are the two organs in the body that are closest connected to each other in a bidirectional way. So communication from the brain to the gut and from the gut to the brain. In simple terms, if I had to explain it to you in more sophisticated terms, it's not really an axis, it's a system. It's a very complex system with multiple loops and multiple affecting other organs, metabolism and immune system. But that's what it is.
Okay, very good. Dr. Ingram, you have been a pioneer in women's health, especially in exploring how hormones like estrogen affect women's bodies much differently than men's. How did you become interested in this work in the first place?
Well, I'm a woman first.
So lived experience.
Lived experience. But there were two things that really shaped this. One is I went to meetings on hormone actions that were really primarily male-dominated. And most of those males, did not really even consider females, did not consider sex differences at all, and really female physiology. And the other thing that really inspired me is that when I listened to all the work on estrogen, I would say 99.9% of it was all dedicated to breast cancer. Very important subject. But estrogen is doing a lot more, our brain and our gut and other organs. And nobody was really working on that.
So what sort of research gaps would you say you were trying to fill at the time when you were entering this field?
Just, let's get down to fundamental mechanisms about how estrogen is sculpting female physiology at a very basic level.
All right, so while we stay kind of broad and big picture, let's just start with some definitions. What makes up the gut? And ideally, how do we want it to function?
Well, we could refer to the clinician, but I want my gut to function so that things move through it. Food, nutrients get absorbed and they come out the other end.
That's basically it.
And I don't want there to be any pain associated with that whole process.
I love that. Great way to describe it. What all body parts make up the gut? Like which organs?
I guess I'm going to let you answer that as the...
Well, when you talk about the gut, I mean, literally it's referring to the small and large intestine, But in general discussions, it starts in the mouth, in the oral cavity, and goes all the way to the end.
Okay. Let's say a patient comes in and says, my gut feels off. What are the most common reasons or what could be bothering them, especially if your patients are women in particular?
Yeah, so this is what I was going to say. First of all, most of patients that come to me with that complaint are women. It's about 4-1, to
Wow.
men. And the most common patient that ends up with me, because I've already seen so many other physicians before, is somebody with pretty severe either irritable bowel syndrome, chronic abdominal pain, functional dyspepsia, so more the upper part of the abdomen. But I would say, and when I say severe irritable bowel syndrome, it's not just the gut. There's, when you probe deeper, ask more questions, it's essentially pain in multiple parts of the body, from headaches, migraine, vulvodynia, fibromyalgia. So if somebody is a severe gut patient, it's not limited to the gut, but it probably starts somewhere in the gut. If you go back in the history, when they were young or as teenagers, the main thing was they had gut issues.
Yeah. This is going to sound like a very sort of basic question, but how do the gut and the brain communicate with each other?
Multiple pathways. One is that the gut is closely connected by nerve pathways. The vagus nerve is one. Again, bidirectional, goes from sensing things in the gut. So 90% of the vagal nerve fibers are sensory. 10% go top down, regulating motility. And so that's one pathway. Another one is hormonal or endocrine. So GLP-1 is a good example.
Yeah. Very hot right now.
But it's not just GLP-1. There's more than 40 of these hormones, or 40 different types of endocrine or hormonal cells in the gut, interspersed with the lining of the gut. And they respond to food intake directly, but also indirectly through signals that the microbes send to them. Okay. So they are the interface between the microbes that produce all these, what we call metabolites, like short-chain fatty acids and secondary bile acids. They act on receptors on these hormonal cells, and the hormonal cells release the hormones. Some of them go to the brain. And then the third thing is, I would say, the immune pathway. And again, the microbes have to be mentioned here because they are a very short distance, like 1 micron away from the immune system in the gut. And they communicate with the immune system. If the gut is leaky and components of the membrane of some of these microbes get into the immune system and the systemic circulation, then there's also immune signaling to the brain, can pass the blood-brain barrier and activate immune cells in the brain. So that's all from the gut to the brain. The brain sends down signals through the so-called autonomic nervous system. So when you're stressed, the sympathetic nervous system basically affects virtually all the gut functions.
Right.
And there's also cortisol, the HPA axis, which in terms of gut modulation is less understood in terms of these impacts that the sympathetic nervous system has.
Okay.
So just to give you an example, the leaky gut under stress, stress and the sympathetic nervous system makes the gut more permeable to microbes, particularly which then act on the immune system.
So you weren't lying when you said it's a really intricate system.
Yeah, and I think people are still not grasping how intricate it is. And even though I'm a gastroenterologist, I'm not really biased. I think the body in itself is fascinating. It's not. But I think the brain-gut communication system is probably the most important, what we call homeostatic system in the body that affects everything else, because it's the interface between the food that we ingest and the brain signals that go down from our stress level and from our environment. So it's at the center of everything, together with the microbes. I mean, most of my colleagues will not believe that. They like to do an endoscopy and just focus on the gut, and that's it. There's no other discussion with the patient. But it's fascinating.
Well, I study the brain and I study the gut, and I wouldn't have said that the gut was more complex than the brain, but after studying it for about maybe 8 years.
Yeah.
It's pretty complex.
It sounds like it. It sounds like
it's I would say in terms of complexity, probably similar in a different ways. But similar.
Different ways. But and I think the other thing is there's in today's scientific world, there's a lot of stuff going on with brain body.
Right.
that is really emerging. So I think we're gonna learn much more about other organs that communicate with the brain and probably the gut. So there's probably going to be a lot of interaction.
Yeah, but that's an interesting historical thing, So when I looked for a thesis advisor in medical school, I said my interest is in brain-body interactions. So I went to all these old professors, and they said, "Yeah, Dr. Meyer, this is a very interesting question, but we can't study it scientifically." I finally found a lab where I worked in about brain-heart interactions, and that was pretty fascinating as well. Yeah. But the heart is a pump, I mean, it's not the elaborate organ that our gut is. And but what you said is it's a process that unfolded during the last 40 years.
Yes.
40 years ago, there was tremendous resistance, the medical system to accept, even the psychiatrists wanted to stay in their brain. They did not want to.
I think the gut was really considered sort of in the backwaters of science.
Interesting.
And it as my colleague in Australia said, he said, "I never thought I'd see the day when the colon went mainstream." And it's really true.
It's hot right now.
Yeah.
Dr. Ingram, let's talk a little bit more specifically on your work and your research and how it distinguishes and focuses on the female gut.
Yes. Well, so I work with a gut group, and I said the only way I'm going to stay in this game and this field is if I can work on females and look at the sex differences, because we had noticed as a group how sensitive the female response was to basically if we stimulate cells, we could see that females were so much more sensitive than males. And when I'm saying that, I'm talking about a preclinical model system of mice. So we noticed that early on.
So you were talking about the link between the gut and estrogen levels?
Yes. So what is so interesting is how long have the reagents on estrogen signaling been around? For at least 30 years, maybe 35 years. And if you looked in the literature and you said, okay, where is estrogen acting in the gut?
Yeah.
You sort of got all over the place. And there's 3 estrogen receptors in our body. Which one is primarily functioning in the gut? Again, there was sort of this, nobody really had nailed it.
Okay.
So we went in with sort of new technology and discovered that estrogen, the main estrogen receptor in the body, is in these cells that also secrete GLP-1, so they're called L cells. But let me back up and just sort of tell you what we've found. Yeah. So we have discovered that basically estrogen initiates a relay race that's initiated by one of these short-chain fatty acids, these acetates. And so one of these cells has a little sensor for that. And then that causes a hormone to be released and then relayed to another cell within the gut that then connects to the nerves and up to the brain.
Wow.
And estrogen enhances all of that. And so we have speculated that females need this because when is estrogen high?
At a certain point in our cycle.
Moreover, when you are pregnant, during that last trimester, estrogen skyrockets. And we think this whole system is set in place so that the pregnant mother is highly sensitive to the environment and what she ingests.
Wow.
So
it's
that's
almost like a survival tactic.
We think it's there to really protect progeny.
Wow.
And then when it becomes maladaptive during the normal cycle, and you have other environmental cues, you get this maladaptive response of chronic gut pain.
Okay, so that pretty much answers my next question, which was going to be how might a woman's gut issues present differently from a man's with the exact same condition? Can you talk through maybe an example?
Well, I mean, I'm not the clinician. I just know that that IBS is so prevalent in females compared to males. Now, in terms of how they come in with their symptoms, I think you could, as a card-carrying clinician, you can answer that much better than I can.
Yeah, so it's interesting, if you compare the relative prevalence, it's only women only 1.5 times more likely to have a diagnosis of IBS, for example. But if you go to the clinic, there are 4 to 5 times more women will seek medical advice for their symptoms. But there's a gender component, a behavioral component that a woman will react differently when she has pain anywhere in her body. And, women experience pain on a regular basis with the menstrual cycle, with childbirth. So the female body is much differently equipped to deal with pain. And if these systems that normally, keep people from reproducing, because if they had excruciating pain every time they got pregnant or delivery, then there wouldn't be any children.
Right.
So there are systems that counteract this as well, that go from the brain down the spinal cord. So these descending pain inhibitory systems that make it, make it acceptable for a woman to go through these.
Does this link between estrogen and gut health explain or mean that problems in the gut can heighten menopausal symptoms too? Because we've talked about pregnancy, we haven't talked about perimenopause.
That's a really great question, and I think we don't understand that. So the work we've done would suggest that anytime you have a surge in estrogen or a fluctuation from low to high, you'll trigger this visceral sensitivity or gut pain through these nerves that are going to go into the spinal cord and up to the brain. But we know that many women, postmenopausal women, all of a sudden have gut issues. And that can't be linked to estrogen.
Right.
And so there has to be something else going on there that we don't yet understand.
Dr. Meyer, you are kind of an expert in the estrobolome. So tell us what it is. Define it for us first.
Yeah, I have to admit, so 5 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to give you this answer. But we've been studying it pretty intensively and continue it because it's a very exciting area. So microbiome, anytime we talk about a biome, we use that term. The estrobolome is basically microbes that are involved in estrogen metabolism and recycling. And it's one of the most fascinating stories, I think, that, first of all, there's 3 sites in the body that produce estrogen. One is the brain, one is the adrenals, and, the third one, the most important one, the ovaries. The estrogen levels in the blood, so they're processed in the liver, metabolized in the liver, so that then they're excreted with the bile, get into the small intestine, and normally they would be excreted through the stool.
Okay.
But that's not what's happening because there are certain microbes that have an enzyme, beta-glucuronidase, complicated name, that removes that molecule that the liver has added and now makes the estrogens in the stool reabsorbable.
Wow.
So in the small bowel, women reabsorb estrogen. It happens in men with testosterone as well. And some of that is high enough that there's, even in the postmenopausal state, there's estrogen levels that are not explainable just by the production by the ovaries or by the adrenal glands. And
do we want to be reabsorbing our estrogen this way? Is it good on balance?
No, obviously, we actually would like to have ways to manipulate the estrobolome, these microbes, to do this more efficiently for estrogen in postmenopause, because it would get rid of many of the symptoms that women experience.
Got it.
And in men, to increase testosterone, in young men, testosterone levels without having to take a medication.
Okay.
So we could manipulate sex hormone levels, not by medication, but by something that we change the microbial composition.
Just like encouraging
Yeah.
a natural process that's
Yeah.
already happening in our body.
And that will happen, I guarantee you. This will happen.
Somebody's working on it somewhere.
No, because it's just so attractive. A natural,
It is.
a
That's
natural
quite
way to-
attractive. And maybe that's why postmenopausal women, their gut microbiome or microbiota changes and then causes this change in local estrogen. Because that's what we're really talking about, local estrogen signaling within the gut
Okay.
and not elsewhere.
How do we test to know whether the estrobolome is functioning normally?
It's not easy because many microbes have that enzyme that's necessary to, to make the estrogen reabsorbable. And there's currently no assays. No, actually there is. So you can, if you get a stool test, there's some stool tests.
Oh, okay. That might be a way.
For example, Tiny Health does this. They give you the levels of this enzyme that's in the stool sample.
Okay.
The difference, some women have very severe postmenopausal symptoms, others don't.
Yeah.
So the ones that have minimal symptoms are probably the ones that have that mechanism well developed. But good testing, reliable testing of that, I don't think we have the means yet to do that.
All right. Well, we'll start with you, Dr. Meyer. The gut's sending out signaling molecules of all kinds, as you have talked to us about. Can you walk me through some of the key hormones that are being released by or interacting with our gut?
Yeah, so when there's a whole group of so-called satiety hormones, have names like cholecystokinin or the GLP-1. There's a whole range of these that are being released to tell the brain when you have eaten that you have eaten enough for you to satisfy your metabolism.
Okay.
So this is not for the hedonic eating that you crave, because you love the food. It's just what the body has set up to give you enough energy that it needs to function properly. There's also another hormone that same mechanism in these cells in the gut called ghrelin that's in the stomach, in stomach cells.
Yeah.
And that has the opposite effect. It stimulates appetite.
Oh, interesting.
But these hormones from the gut, they have, so first of all, they're not in these cells, they're not isolated. They're mixed with, several hormones are mixed in the same cell. Mm-hmm. So the ultimate signal is complex, like everything in the gut. They interact also with hormones and molecules that are not produced in the gut, like cortisol or like stress hormones. So you have this whole, what we call endocrine mixture of signals that ultimately reach different receptors in the brain, but ultimately influence how much you eat, how much appetite you have, how much craving you have, how much you're nauseated by eating something. Mm-hmm. So all these common symptoms that we have, or most of them, come from the gut, and the microbes play a role. The bad microbes, the pathogens, infections like E. coli infection, for example, gives you the worst nausea and unpleasant feeling. And some of the other ones, have the opposite effect. They make you feel good, satiated after a good meal. That's a hormonal effect from the gut.
Just as I'm thinking through eating, does it matter for the optimal functioning of this whole system, this whole intricate system that we've been talking about, if I eat faster or slower?
Yeah, it's an interesting question.
Just asking for me.
Yeah, so if you look at animals, like you look at lions or wolves or coyotes, they gulp everything down as fast as they can.
I have a golden retriever.
Yeah, so they don't take time at all. So it can't be bad for them,
Oh, good point.
But the slow eating for humans is probably the more adaptive way, because it also combines the social dimension. So for humans, eating in a social context, particularly once cooking and the fire was invented, became a really important component of the whole digestive process. And so I would say slow eating for humans let the animals do their fast.
It's not like we're going to slow them down anyway.
I was just going to follow up on the hormones in the gut
Yeah.
and just say that, one of the new things that we've discovered is that estrogen causes not release of a hormone like GLP, but a release of the hormone PYY. And PYY for ages has been thought to be a satiety factor.
Oh.
There's other people said, no, it's not, people that I respect. And in fact, what we found is that this hormone really doesn't have a lot to do with food intake, but it has a lot to do with what we call nociception or pain. So I think we have a lot more to discover about the multiple roles of these gut hormones. Yeah.
So I would like to give you a brief anecdote.
Okay, great.
So the reason I came to UCLA for my clinical training, it started with 3 years in the lab actually at UCLA, and the people that were there were focused on these gut hormones. They had just developed what's called a radioimmunoassay, a way to measure these hormone levels, and there were people in Sweden that ground down tons of pig intestine to come up with a small amount of this hormone. And so most of these hormones were isolated initially in the gut at the time. It was a very exciting time. And then at the same time, people found the same molecules in the brain. But the interesting thing in retrospect is nobody knew exactly what they were doing. There was really, and then there was a decrease in enthusiasm because people said, they're interesting, they're part of the regulation of gut function, but we don't really know exactly why we have all this.
Wow.
So the GLP-1, this has taken 40 years. Like I have still my records from 40 years ago where we looked at these molecules, GIP and GLP-1.
Yes.
And we had no idea how important they would become, So this is really fascinating for me.
Wow.
Yes, GLP-1 has come a long ways.
Yes. While we were talking about the hormones involved here, could you talk a little bit about how hormones mediate the communication between the gut and the brain?
Yes. So what we think is going on is that estrogen signaling is causing release of this hormone that's called PYY, and that is then basically binding to another cell within the gut that's going to release serotonin. And serotonin is one of the major ways that you're going to communicate from your gut to your brain. So essentially what happens is this specialized cell, once it gets a signal, and it basically drives gut pain by releasing serotonin. So these cells make 90% of the serotonin in our body. Wow. So they're really important for serotonin signaling. And then that talks to a neighboring nerve that then sends signals up to the brain. So it's this the way I look at it is all these signals, these hormone signals, maybe immune signals, are coming into this one cell type within the gut that is going to make serotonin, that's going to drive visceral sensitivity and gut pain. So that's the key for gut pain. And it's targeted with some drugs like ondansetron or elacestrant, which is used to inhibit nausea when you have cancer, but is also used to try to eliminate some of the gut pain, especially for women.
Okay, what about other symptoms that women face, like during, right before our period, like constipation and bloating?
Yeah.
Does this link tie to those kinds of symptoms?
Well, all I'll say is that when we went in and we eliminated estrogen signaling in the gut, we changed the motility of the gut. So the transit time really sped up when we get rid of estrogen signaling. So we would say that estrogen signaling is pretty important for maintaining appropriate the gut transit times. And so, how all of that fits with all the changing hormones is complex.
So there's not like a thumbs up, thumbs down quick answer for this, because
so.
my follow-up question was going to be, that could fixing gut health help with other symptoms of PMS or hot flashes later during menopause, for example?
What it might help with is anxiety, because there's a pretty good connection between mounting visceral sensitivity and gut pain through these key cells that send out serotonin to anxiety. Okay. And we know that there's a pretty strong link between anxiety and gut pain. So, and I guess in the clinics, it's like women would come in, they would be anxious, they would have gut pain, and then what's causing what, right? So part of the work that we've done would suggest that the gut is really contributing to anxiety.
Yeah. You're kind of already speaking to this. Your lab discovered that gut microbes can act like endocrine organs themselves. What does that discovery mean? How did you wind up there?
Well, okay, so what we would suggest is that the bacterial metabolites like acetate or short-chain fatty acids, that whole process is being amplified by estrogen.
Okay.
And so, where do you have a lot of acetate, especially if you eat a diet with high fermentable carbohydrates? You have them in the distal colon, and that's where you're going to sense pain. Oh. So, people have done experiments. They've measured, the amount of acetate in your distal colon and it's really high, especially if you eat diets that are high in FODMAPs. Have you heard of that?
No, talk to us about FODMAPs. I assume that's an acronym.
It is.
What does it stand for?
And I did not know about all of this until I was on TikTok and saw this.
How did I know you were about to say
TikTok?
Yeah. I didn't know about this until TikTok, yes. But first of all, what are FODMAPs?
Okay, so oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols.
Okay, wow.
Okay.
Very good. All
Okay.
right, so if you want to break down each of those dimensions, sort of letters in the acronym, into just like a practical food that would have a lot of these.
Well, I guess it would be, something with high fructose would definitely be something like that. Like fruit, a lot of fruit,
Okay.
some of the fruit.
The sweeter fruits.
Some vegetables. There is a complicated list of these foods. Something like mushrooms, apparently. So they're definitely selective foods that are going to contribute more to this. And what I should say is that the whole idea is that these are food sources that are taken up by the bacteria that are fermentable carbohydrates. That's the key.
Right.
What our data would say is that if you reduced the production of acetate by lowering your FODMAPs, lowering your intake of fermentable carbohydrates, estrogen is basically enhancing the expression of the receptor, of the sensor for all of those FODMAPs.
And let's get practical. What are examples of fermentable carbohydrates?
Well, fructose, anything with high fructose. Polyols are found in mushrooms.
Oh, no.
Yeah, complex carbohydrates, basically all the healthy foodstuffs, the fiber.
Like whole grain bread?
That's all complex carbohydrates. And
so if you have IBS, you shouldn't be eating this stuff.
I'm on a different, I'm not riding this FODMAP train.
Oh, okay. You're not riding it. Dr. Meyer, not on the FODMAP train. All right.
And I'm probably one of the few people to do this because it's not sustainable. It's very unhealthy. So basically, you tell somebody take out all the fiber from your food, then you won't have the symptoms. But if it's milk, then 80% of people that, with the exception of Inuits and Scandinavians who have that enzyme to break down milk sugar. So that's an easy one. You don't need to
Just go ahead and eliminate that.
Yeah. But to decrease or eliminate, so now it's changed from the beginning.
I think it's probably pretty hard to stick to that diet. But as I was giving this talk, I had a gentleman come up to me and said, okay, my daughter just texted me. Or no, somebody in the audience said, I just want to know, I have terrible IBS and I can't eat mushrooms. And I looked it up, and that's because polyols are, it's mushrooms.
It's the P.
So
Well, there's certain food items, I would agree, that individualized, there's usually less than a handful of plant-based food items that people get more IBS symptoms or just gut symptoms. But to eliminate all these and then reintroduce it because you can't really sustain that diet, I think is crazy. But it keeps a whole generation of dietitians busy, and it's an unfortunate thing. There's so many. So gastroenterology is the one specialty where you can come up with things like this. They hang around for 5, sometimes 7 years, and then they're being replaced by something else. I've seen in my career.
You're talking about trend culture in
for example,
our diets, essentially.
Like when I started my training, high fiber was recommended for IBS patients for the constipation. So the opposite what the FODMAP is,
My assistant has terrible gut issues, and that's exactly, she said, my doctor said I need to go on low FODMAP diet. And I said, I think we understand why. But I agree with you. I mean, it does make sense.
Yeah, because microbes break down complex carbohydrates if you eat them. So a lot of people have reduced their fiber intake so dramatically in the US that it's less of an issue. But it's a normal process that microbes break down these complex carbohydrates, and a byproduct is the generation of gas, which most people don't feel. So our what we call interoception, or the sensory mechanism in the gut, is set at a point that you don't feel anything that goes on. Actually, a lot of things go on in our gut that we don't feel. But if you have a hypersensitive gut, then you feel it. So the issue with IBS patients is it's their hypersensitive gut that when they eat a lot of beans and peas and legumes, they will develop the symptoms. So it's not the microbes that are the culprit. It's the hypersensitivity that these patients have. And so, anyway, I may be an outlier in this dietary debate that's raging, but
who knew that we would land on this particular?
I don't tell patients what to do. So this is very interesting.
Yes.
I mean, I think to your point, what we wonder is whether there's some sort of insult, an initial insult to the gut, some viral infection that really helps re-sculpt that whole gut nerve conduit that we're talking about. And that is important to understand, because when we talk about IBS, we're trying to create these models in the lab, but what we don't know is whether they're like stress could actually change everything forever, so that you always are susceptible to gut disorders, functional gut disorders.
I actually did want to ask you, when patients come to you and they say, stress is wrecking my stomach, what is actually happening there in their bodies?
Yeah, different kinds of stress. All of us are stressed in our world, both with things that we read about, hear about, or that we experience in traffic on the 405. But there's important differences. So some people are more stress sensitive. There's a hyperreactivity to stress. You can measure it all the way down to, on a molecular level, the gene expression of genes related to the sympathetic nervous system. But there's also, people that have a very high resilience, that experience the same kind of stress but have no response at all. So this is, you have to say, there's no homogeneity in terms of when you experience a stressor, if it is stressful for you or not. The brain obviously orchestrates the stress response, and depending on the severity of the stressor, if it's a life-threatening stressor, all the systems in the body are being engaged in this response, the fight and flight response.
Yeah.
So it shifts everything to your muscles and away from the digestive tract. But that doesn't really happen that often. It does obviously with violence and the severe cases of violence in our society. It still does happen,
Sure.
Not with lions, but with interactions with. I'm sure a lot of the undocumented immigrants are going through that kind of stress right now. What's much more common is the chronic low-level stress that's always there.
And is that why most patients is that the type of stress that most patients are presenting when they go and see you?
Yeah. So
Okay.
it's what we also call allostatic load,
Mm-hmm.
and that changes the system. As you said, it permanently changes
Wow.
the responsiveness, and that's the dangerous one. So we don't want to have any.
How does it change? Does it make us more responsive, make our systems even more
Yeah,
sensitive going forward?
Yeah, and
So it, in some ways, it could essentially lower our resilience, our system's
yeah,
resilience?
yeah.
Okay. Wow.
But we don't know. We don't really know what's going on. I mean, at a cellular and functional level, and that would be really wonderful to know what is going on.
All right, Dr. Ingram, what exactly is happening, or if you could describe for us what exactly is happening in the gut with the rise and fall of estrogen levels, that
Okay.
would be helpful.
So I can talk about the rise in estrogen, and what we think is occurring is that you're triggering a cascade of actions that's going to then feed into cells that are going to drive visceral sensitivity. And when that becomes too much, it's, as Dr. Meyer said, it's visceral hypersensitivity, and chronic gut pain can ensue.
Got it.
Okay?
And then when the estrogen levels drop?
When estrogen levels drop, this whole system would go offline. But the nuance here may be that it's not just about high or low estrogens, but it's the fluctuating estrogen levels that are driving some of this physiology. Okay. And that's what we still need to work on.
And that's associated with the IBS symptom increase, the fluctuation. It's not the actual levels.
It's not whether it's high or low.
Yeah,
it's just the up and down. The up and down period. Yeah, okay. Let's go back to menopause. I'd love to know how hormonal shifts, especially during perimenopause and menopause, have an impact on our gut health. Big question.
I don't think I can give you an answer yet.
This is great. It's a call for more research.
I would love to give you an answer. We've only really studied the onboarding of hormones and how they would affect gut, the role of estrogen. What we haven't really looked at is how chronic depletion of estrogen is going to affect gut health. What we do know is that if you get rid of ovaries in a mouse and you deplete estrogen completely, you essentially make that gut more male-like.
So what do you mean by more male-like?
Okay, so when we compare males versus females, and we use a fancy technique called optogenetics to actually measure the responses in the gut nerve response. So we use light, we shine light, and we can actually measure how much light intensity does it take to activate these nerves.
Okay.
And so when you compare a male versus a female, it takes hardly anything for the female, and they are just boom, they're triggered.
Yeah.
Whereas males require much more light intensity. Does that make sense?
Yes. So essentially, the female mice were like way less bothered.
No. You don't need very much of
but after they became more male-like.
Exactly.
Once they lost their ovaries, they were less bothered.
Once you lose their ovaries, all of a sudden their curve shifts over to a male.
Yes. And then
So
the
it's
sensitivity
pretty
is
impressive.
much lower.
Yes.
Okay.
So they need way more light to get them triggered.
Got it.
Okay? Does that make
Yes,
sense?
totally.
Okay, great.
So does it lower pain, for example? Or?
So yes, I mean your visceral sensitivity really.
So you're living a better life.
You're living
without your ovaries.
But of course, there's something we're missing because a lot of women that are postmenopausal all of a sudden get these gut issues. So there's something we're missing. We have to work on this.
Yeah, there's only one piece of the puzzle there, and it doesn't fully solve the bigger questions.
Yes. So.
Okay.
But it's also it's a very complex issue because some estrogens have at the brain level an inhibitory effect on pain perception or an anxiety, or others have the opposite effect, and there are estrogen system in the brain, in the ovaries, in the gut. So you have multiple. It's not just one location. I mean, the gut is not the only location where it's happening. And the gut symptoms are complex. Some people get them and others don't. This is one good example why it's so much harder to study things in humans.
It's so hard to generalize.
It's hard to generalize. People are so different. Like you don't have mice that are genetically identical, raised under identical conditions. So there's all these factors that go into it, and genetics, play a significant role. So this is why you see much more studies on animals, and they're much more clear cut, and they make it into the headlines. Most of the journalists do not pay much attention. They extrapolate automatically to the human condition. But we know a lot more about mice and mouse biology than we know about humans.
Before we wrap up this particular segment, I'd love to know what y'all's biggest questions are when it comes to the role of hormones and our guts. Like, what are the questions that keep you up at night or that you really want to research?
I don't know. I'm thinking about that. So what I think we would like to know is you've mentioned how stress and hormones sort of intersect to then change this whole gut nerve conduit that we think is important for gut pain. And I think we would like to, because we're so focused on looking at these different stages in female physiology and how we've mounted these adaptive physiological responses to meet each one of those stages. What is going on in pregnancy? So did you know, for instance, at least in the mouse, the gut elongates by 25%. During pregnancy.
Holy cow.
It's huge.
I remember learning that we have to pump 50% more blood when carrying a baby.
You do.
So the heart is working very hard. Even though it's just a pump, it does have to pump so much more blood. But also, our colon is longer, or our intestines are longer?
That's right.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, there are such profound changes.
And it goes back? Kind of like our uterus?
Well, in mouse, it doesn't really. I mean, I don't know all the data in human. You probably know more than I do about this. But I told the people in the lab, I said, hey, look at this. Get a pregnant mouse. Is this real? And they go, whoa, this is so long.
My shoe size got bigger and it just never went back.
So we know that pregnancy and lactation are just these huge, the demands on female physiology is huge, okay? and so we want to know what is going on during pregnancy in the gut.
Yeah.
We really want to know this because we know that there have to be all sorts of things happening in that gut to meet the demand for progeny and also for self, right? Yeah. So that's what we're going to be looking at.
That's great. That's great questions. Can't wait for that research to bear fruit. What about you? Big questions?
For me, one of the most fascinating, as we already talked about, fascinating questions is the role of the microbes in this recycling of sex hormones back into our body, and what effect this has, and how can we manipulate it. So, right now the recommendation would be, eat a healthy diet. That's what we always say, to increase the diversity so you have more of these microbes that can do this. So that probably works. But there's a new field of genetically engineering microbes, that you actually insert mechanisms that they can do things that the normal microbes don't do.
Yeah.
And there's phenomenal possibilities what can be done through this mechanism. And this is one that you would greatly enhance, for example, this mechanism of salvaging estrogen or testosterone. I think, to me, that's one of the most interesting issues.
All right, Dr. Meyer, how does the brain-gut axis explain why some medications, like antidepressants, may affect your gut?
Well, I think it's important to realize that just like the liver, a lot of our medications, just like other chemicals that we ingest with our food or involuntarily, are processed or metabolized by the microbes. So the microbes have, 1 million genes compared to our 20,000, and they have been around for billions of years. So they have a lot of experience, or we call implicit intelligence. So they don't talk, nicely, but they know a lot.
Right,
and they, so when they see things, even compounds, what we call xenobiotics. So any chemical, any substance that is foreign to the microbes or to us, when that gets into the gut, it's processed in a way that can be positive for us or negative. But it can also change, for example, the treatment of Parkinson's disease. The whole dopamine metabolism is influenced by microbes, and the fluctuations of effectiveness of Parkinson's medication can fluctuate hugely. If you take 100 patients, give them the same dose, one responds, the other doesn't. One develops side effects, the other doesn't. That appears to be to a great degree related to the breakdown or how the microbes handle the medication that you take. Like L-Dopa is one of the main medications, and the amount that's being absorbed is highly variable, even though you take the same dose, based on the microbial effects on it.
Yeah.
And that pretty applies to most medications, including depressions.
So how do we know the right dosage for our medication if we don't know exactly how our guts are
the best
absorbing?
thing is sort of the clinical approach to start low. I mean, that's what I do with all my medications. Start almost like at a homeopathic dose and titrate it up and see when do you see actually benefit and when do you get the side effects.
Okay.
That's not what pharmaceutical industry tells you, to give a dose, the same dose. But it's I think it may be one of the most important functions of microbes in our world, where we just throw in so many things that nature has never exposed us to in millions of years of human evolution. It's difficult. I mean, there's definitely studies, what we call population-based studies, and where we compare a population that has a diagnosis of depression with one that doesn't, and you look at their gut microbes, and there's several of these studies that have shown differences, but population-based studies don't demonstrate causality. So you don't know if the microbes play a role in this, or equally likely that depression or anxiety or chronic stress, through these signals that go down to the gut.
So it could go either way. It could be the microbiome affecting our brains, or our brains affecting our microbiome.
And we know both things happen. So when you're stressed, you have a different microbiome than when you're not stressed.
Wow.
The problem is, you can only show this so far in mouse studies, because you can control everything. You can say, so all the causality studies come from mouse or preclinical experiments. In humans, we're stuck with these association studies, or we take a sample of a stool of a patient with depression, put it into a mouse without its own microbes, and see if this mouse then develops what's called depression-like behavior. I would say a good answer would be that the gut and its microbes, I would always include the microbes. The gut alone doesn't do these things. Play a role in both depression and anxiety. How important that role is, and how much an intervention, for example, targeted the gut microbes, would have a dramatic effect on your mental state. There's a whole new field of nutritional psychiatry that states that.
Interesting.
The studies to support that, there's some studies, but they're generally association studies.
We were talking earlier about chronic stress and its effect on gut bacteria and how it can shrink that protective gut bacteria. So for a menopausal woman with high levels of cortisol, their cortisol is soaring. What's happening biologically there?
Well, biologically, it is particularly the transition, the perimenopause, is a big stressor on the homeostasis.
And we should say for listeners that cortisol is a stress hormone. So
it's one of the main stress hormones, together with norepinephrine. And so imagine that you have a system that regulates your physiology all the way down to the cellular level in each organ for 45, 50 years of your life. And then all of a sudden you shut it off. This is a major stressor on the system. It has to adapt in multiple ways. And
so much to look forward to.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
This is why it's important to find a way to use the microbes to slow that process or delay it.
I like that idea.
And then separately, can you explain the connection between our guts and our immunity and our immune systems?
That's an easier one to answer.
Okay, good.
So 70% of our immune system is located in the gut, and not just anywhere, but like a micron away. So this tiny distance away from trillions of microbes. So any engineer would propose something like this would thought to be crazy,
right.
Because it could cause life-threatening. If this barrier is broken, could cause life-threatening symptoms. And so in a healthy gut, this is one of the definitions of a healthy gut, that the barrier is tight between the microbes on the one side, even the good bacteria, not just the pathogens. And it's accomplished by a couple of mechanisms. One is a thick mucus layer made out of sugar molecules, basically, and what we call the epithelial layer, which is the cells so you have a mucus layer and you have a cell layer. Okay. And that system is so tight normally that nothing bacterial gets through.
Wow.
But there are sensors of the immune system that stick into this mucus layer. So if the mucus layer gets thinner because you're on an unhealthy diet, then some of these good microbes, we call commensals, they come in contact with these sensors of the immune cells, and that triggers an alarm bell and a whole cascade then of first the activation of the gut-based immune system, cytokine production, then that gets into the systemic circulation, and then can reach any organ in the body. So this is probably one of the most important and best studied aspects of the gut microbiome, that it plays such a crucial role. And this mechanism could be involved in most of our chronic diseases now. Wow. Like if you look at from colon cancer to Alzheimer's to Parkinson's, it comes down to this fact that we have this increased permeability, or in the lay press, leakiness of the gut. Yeah. Leakiness implies that they actually have holes in it, but that doesn't have to be the case. It's shrinking your mucus layer is enough to cause that situation. And so it could ultimately be, what we call the string theory of chronic disease.
Wow.
Because
everything is connected.
It's not the only cause. You always need genetics, and then you need, but it's definitely a factor that contributes significantly to, and now we see this phenomena that colon cancer increases in young people. The age goes down.
It's been wild. Yeah.
The same thing with cognitive decline. With many of these chronic diseases, the age range is changing. And nobody knows exactly why that is. It must be something environmental,
Right.
Otherwise it couldn't.
But those environmental factors could be having a great effect on that mucus layer, is what you're talking about.
On the microbes, and then how they interact with the immune system.
Okay. Dr. Ingram, when gut inflammation triggers joint pain, like in rheumatoid arthritis, what's actually happening at the microbial level?
I don't know, especially when it comes to joint pain.
Okay.
And as my husband's physician said to him, if you discover what causes osteoarthritis, you will get another Nobel Prize.
Another.
Another.
Wow.
So this is one of the big issues, really, especially in the musculoskeletal area, is what is triggering osteoarthritis, which also is much more prevalent in women than men. We really don't know. There has been others have suggested there is this communication between the intestine and bone, not necessarily joints, but bone.
So bone density?
Bone density.
Okay.
But nobody, to my knowledge, has really made a good case for connecting what's going on in the gut and, what's different things that are released with joints.
Okay.
Okay?
I mean, I would say, the specifics for the joints we don't know, but this immune system activation in other organs throughout the body, from the brain, the liver, the big one, the fat tissue, the heart, this immune activation originates to a significant degree in the gut, by the mechanism that I told you, the release of cytokines that then circulate, or other immune cells like dendritic cells can migrate. If that's the main cause, or if it's one facilitating factor in osteoarthritis, would know. But I think chronic inflammation has become the unifying theme, I think, that we look at today at chronic disease, with variations,
Dr. Meyer, fecal studies are very trendy right now. So I'm just curious, is there any value in sequencing our gut?
I think in principle, it's definitely something we also do in scientific experiments. You want to know what's there. When this started, I still remember patients came with a 15-page report to my office and said, "Can you tell me what this means?" So a lot of people signed up for these stool tests and really got nothing out of it. Then it was used basically to prescribe supplements. That's still so personalizing based on your stool microbiome, what things you can eat or can't eat. So I did several of these tests out of curiosity, what the feedback was, and one of them would tell me you cannot eat blueberries. They're toxic for you, which is a ridiculous conclusion.
So you have been able to eat blueberries without any ill effect. Okay.
So this has moved forward in terms of the technologies. They're more sensitive now. They look also at function, not just who is there, but what do these microbes do. I would say there's one or two right now that meets these criteria where the field has moved to. It will tell you, if you have an unhealthy diet, it will tell you have a decreased diversity or decreased richness. But you don't really have to do them in order to start a therapy. It's not. I think what this field will move to in 5 or maximally 10 years, it's going to become very useful. And I think most people are going to undergo these tests that you can predict early cognitive decline, Parkinson's disease risk, not 100%, but risk, inflammatory bowel disease, before the onset of the full symptoms. So I think in terms of prediction, I think it will, that also combined with artificial intelligence. So I think in principle, these tests are good. I would pick out a couple. I mentioned earlier, Tiny Health is the one that I would pick based on my evaluation of it, which was developed originally for children, for infants, but has now been expanded as an adult indication as well. So I would say, guardedly positive, but not the way it's propagated right now.
I heard you mention diversity, so I have to ask what the importance of flora diversity is in our gut.
Yeah, diversity is, so any ecosystem we talk about, ecosystem is always a combination of organisms living in harmony and synchrony and symbiosis, has certain criteria. So a healthy ecosystem is always characterized by diversity, meaning how many different types of microbes are there, and by richness, what quantities of each of these microbes are present. So that's right now, I think, the best criteria for us to say this is a healthy microbiome, if it is very high in this. And if you eat a very restricted diet, you don't need this diversity, because you only need some specialists that, like if you only eat tomatoes, you only need a very small number of different, experts to break down this tomato. If you eat a highly diverse diet, it's been recommended, 30 to 35 different fruits and vegetables a week.
Wow.
Then obviously it will force your microbiome to expand and hire new specialists to contribute and help with the breakdown. Same with naturally fermented foods. If you eat a variety, each one has different microbes in it. It forces. So I think diversity links several things together. The health of this system, what diet is supporting that. There's also many association studies how low diversity is associated with many chronic diseases.
Oh, okay.
It's again association, not cause and effect,
All right, next question. What is fecal microbial transfer and how does it work?
Yeah, fecal microbial transfer, transplant is something there's different ways of doing it. You can originally, and this goes back actually a long time, it's described in traditional Chinese medicine, transferring stool into people that had severe diarrhea. I think it was called the Emperor's Yellow Soup or something like that.
Wow.
So it's been around for a long time. Veterinarians have used it for their horses when they develop these colicky symptoms, very common in racehorses.
And what's the theory for why it would work?
Well, the theory is that you basically improve the diversity and the health of your gut microbiome.
Oh.
The one situation that this has really worked extremely well in humans is a colitis, C. difficile colitis, that happens in some people after antibiotic consumption, and it virtually knocks out your entire microbiome. Wow. So you have very few measurable microbes left, and in that situation, you give this transplant, and the transplant doesn't create a new microbiome, but it facilitates the comeback of the original microbiome. How it does that is not really known exactly, but it's kind of an amazing thing. It's been tried now in many different diseases: IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, anxiety, autism spectrum. Couple of studies in autism spectrum that suggest it might actually work, but they all come from the same lab, has not been reproduced by anybody else. So right now, it's a great treatment, one of the best treatments for this C. difficile colitis, which is a pretty serious condition. But so many patients ask for that. Would I benefit from it? And I always say, most likely it's not going to do anything for you. You can try it, but most likely it will not have. In the meantime, people have created a consortium of microbes that would be in this transplanted stool sample. So you don't have to get the transplant or eat a capsule that actually has the stool in it, but just select a group of microbes. And that is available and has been shown to be effective, again, in C. difficile colitis.
Okay.
So it's a very clean approach, no stool involved, cultured microbes that you swallow. So
that's a good way to go.
Any aversion
Right.
somebody might have. So with this, again, I think in 5 to 10 years, this will be expanded. The reason it doesn't work in most conditions is because even if you have a compromised gut microbiome, it's a phenomenon called colonization resistance. It will not let other microbes settle in the system.
Yeah.
And that's why it fails in all the other conditions.
Fascinating.
If people they're working hard on overcoming that resistance.
Yeah.
When that happens, I think it could become like a widely used therapy for many diseases.
We have a few audience questions for you all. Or Dr. Meyer, you have volunteered to take the audience questions. So, are you ready?
How many do you have?
Okay.
You're the clinician.
How long do you have? I'm just kidding. All right. What foods have strong links to improved gut-related mental health?
That's an easy question because most these food questions have a very simple answer.
What's that?
A gut healthy or generally healthy diet is, about 70% plant-based and does not have ultra-processed foods in it, has little sugar, and the meat coming primarily from seafood and from poultry. If you stick to that, you will see, and there's many studies on that now, that you have improvements in everything from anxiety to, well, even for cognitive decline, for early cognitive decline. So I would say the answer is fairly simple. Okay. It's that what we call under the name Mediterranean diet.
Yeah.
But I think it's better to say actually what it is, because if you go to an Italian restaurant, that's not the Mediterranean diet.
All right, next question. There's a lot of probiotic discourse out there. How do probiotics interact with SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, in patients?
So this is a...
Our audience is very knowledgeable.
And these are questions I get asked almost every time. The other most common one is, what probiotic should I take? So I give a talk of 45 minutes and the first question is, what probiotic should I take? So first of all, there's a lot of criticism recently, growing amount of criticism amongst the experts. A recent review article by some of the key opinion leaders in gastroenterology, that what we call SIBO is really not what people think it is. Hydrogen breath tests are not reliable way of diagnosing small bacterial overgrowth. Many people that have a positive breath test have no symptoms at all. Treatment with antibiotics, I see a lot of these patients coming from hospitals on the west side of LA that have undergone sometimes 4 courses of antibiotics.
Wow.
It always gets better temporarily because you suppress all microbes. And we talked earlier about microbes. One of their fancy things is to produce gas. So you suppress all the microbes in the colon, less gas production, less symptoms. But in most cases, they come back, the symptoms, when they regrow. And the bad thing about these repeated courses of the antibiotics is the last thing we want to do in this current age where we know so much about the microbiome and how much it's negatively influenced by antibiotics. The last thing you want to do is to give 3 or 4 courses of antibiotics for something that the experts now don't even believe anymore.
Wow.
This myth will be kept alive for a while. I mentioned this earlier. I've seen many of these things happen in my career, come and go. It will ultimately go. I think it will not. When I started my medical career or as a gastroenterologist, these were patients that had severe compromised motility in the gut, like with scleroderma, where the gut doesn't move anymore. And obviously then you have a greater likelihood that microbes live in the first part of your small intestine where they don't belong and where the gas production causes symptoms. But that's a really rare condition. Scleroderma is not a common condition. So SIBO does exist, but in a very small number of people. All the other ones, the symptoms that people like to call now SIBO, which you can talk about in a dinner party. You don't talk about your bloating and your gas, but you can talk about, I have SIBO. And then probably half of the other people will say, oh yeah, I have the same diagnosis. These symptoms are very nonspecific. Bloating, gas, some of the most common symptoms in patients. Again, in female patients more common and in female patients worsened by periods where there's a change in the estrogen level where they get worse. So I would say,
don't believe the hype.
Don't believe the hype. It's difficult right now because it's marketed. Every hospital does it.
All right, last question. We're going to return to women patients out there and your focus. Why do you want to continue, and why should the work and research on women in particular continue?
In terms of women's health, one of the things that is very important is basically all female physiology was basically just a mini male.
Oh.
And that all the principles would apply if you just shrunk it.
Even though our systems are so different.
Even though our systems are so different. And so I think we need people, other researchers that are dedicated to this question of looking at female physiology and sex differences. That just hasn't been the case. And what I go to when I tell people about this is if you look at the funding levels. So if you look at the funding levels for things like breast cancer, tremendous. If you look at the active grants that are looking at IBS, are looking at endometriosis, are looking at polycystic ovary syndrome, some of the migraine even, it's so much lower. So there's this disparity, this funding disparity that has been out there for decades, which means we have a lot of catch up to do. And this is really underscored by the fact that if you look at all the major medical prizes that have been given out, starting with the Nobel Prize, the Gardner Prize, the Lasker Prize, the Breakthrough Prize. I know all of these because my husband has won all of these prizes. So I went back and I looked at the last 20 years, 25 years to see how many of those prizes were given for something that relates to female physiology or women's health.
How many?
Less than 2%. So 9 prizes out of about 470 were given out for something that 50% of us feel every day. And there's lots of reasons. I'm sure I would love to hear your comment on, why you think this is the case. I think a lot of the research hasn't been so good. It's been sort of this associative corollary types of research. So nothing, in order to get one of those prizes, you have to discover something that's transformative, that makes people think about things differently. And that probably just hasn't happened yet in this area because we don't have the young people wanting to come into this area because they see that it's not rewarded. They see that it's not funded well. So it's a vicious
pipeline problem.
It's a pipeline. It's a vicious circle. And I think that our job here is to really inspire the next generation to take this on and say, let's get down to it.
Well, you two have done just such a phenomenal job of making this topic fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, if I could just do one shout out to
yeah.
one entity at the NIH, the ORWH, Office of Research in Women's Health, I was with that organization, was introduced to it like, 20 years ago. And that has expanded. It never became an institute, so it's an office. Hopefully will survive the current cutbacks at the NIH. But they have really pioneered to introduce, they partner with the other NIH institutes, has significantly increased the number of grants funded. And it's become mandatory. You have to address sex differences in all your NIH grants. That was one thing that this office initiated. So I would say there's some women have fought very hard to establish this. Initially, it was a very feminist organization. I felt totally out of place as the only male in it. But in the meantime, it's sort of become quite powerful. So,
but it's so small.
Yeah.
The amount is so small.
Yeah, compared to
51% of us who are women need much more research.
That's such an important reminder, and you two have done just a phenomenal job of making the topic of the gut come alive and really practical and useful information for us and our listeners. We're so grateful. Thank you so much to Dr. Meyer and Dr. Ingram.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And before we let you go, we have a special gift from Tia Health just for you. You'll find out what it is. Here you go.
Oh, thank you.
Enjoy. Open them up. Try them on if you'd like.
Feels like is there something in here? Is it just heaviness?
It's good material.
Wow.
Wow, this is pretty impressive.
Try them on, yeah.
Yeah, I gotta try them. Whoa. There you go.
Look at that, yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah, beautiful.
Yes, you guys look
Beautiful.
fantastic. I love the
Okay.
color. Love the color.
Okay. There. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being our guests for this season of the show.
Okay.
Here's the big idea. Your gut isn't just reacting to your life. It's running the show. From mood swings to immunity, your microbiome is shaping way more than you think. And for women, this isn't just about bloating. This could be a total game changer for your health. Massive thanks to Dr. Meyer and Dr. Ingram for dropping all of their knowledge. And if you want to nerd out on their research or start making gut-friendly changes today, we've linked everything down below. Hit subscribe if you want more conversations that'll change how you think about your body.